Well, let's get started with introductions. Chad, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience here?
Cool. Happy to. So, hi, everybody. My name is Chad Mitchell. I work at TD Bank in our communications and public affairs team, and I head up content and digital platforms. So, for us, it's probably a slightly different approach than what you've heard previously today, because we are more of a corporate communications function and are really focused on telling the brand story about TD Bank. And while we partner with our colleagues in marketing to drive down funnel and use content and creative and are looking for new ways to reach our target audiences, we're sort of above the funnel to top of the funnel, and then using our content to drive down the funnel. So I hope that I'll bring you a slightly different perspective today, a little less marketing and a little more around what we do in corporate communications to tell the story about TD Bank.
Great. I know we're really excited. Hi, everyone. I'm Monica Engelbrecht. I work in marketing and content at Celtra, the creative automation company. But I do come from an agency background where I work with clients like Heineken, PepsiCo, SodaStream. And I'm really excited for this conversation. So I know we're here today to talk about creative transformation and really achieving brilliant creative. So I wanted to start by asking, what does creative excellence mean to you in today's market and at TD?
Yeah, in our industry, and I want to offer my perspective coming from financial services. And prior to financial services, I was in retail at Walmart. So my mind, I've done a little bit of shape shifting here around what creative excellence looks like. And when you're in a heavily regulated industry like ours, you're not going to see us take a lot of chances with creative. There's a lot of downside to being risky in the financial services industry. So what might have been wickedly creative in a retail space for Walmart and push the boundaries doesn't fly so well in financial services. So for a bank especially, it's about how do we build trust and how do we build authentic connections with our target audiences. So any content or any creative that can do those things in a differentiated way, because it's a very crowded space. And my approach has been that while you don't think of TD the same time you're thinking about Stanley Black & Decker, we are competing for the same eyeballs. And so I always try to keep that in mind in terms of what we're creating. So to me, creative excellence is about creating something that's valuable to the user or the consumer, not necessarily what's going to get the high fives inside of your own team or your own organization. And you do a little bit of navel gazing and you're like, this is the best creative we've ever done, and yet it doesn't reach anybody because that's not what the customer wants. So we always try to put ourselves in the shoes of the consumer. What's going to resonate with them, what's useful for them in their journey through their financial cycle. And then really it's going to come down to what's differentiated. And that's a hard word to define depending on what your industry is. And so for us, it's about how do we differentiate ourselves from the large banking centers as well as the regional banks in the US. We are a Canadian-owned company, and in Canada, we are either the number one or number two largest bank, and in the US, we're a competitor, a challenger brand. So that creates different pushes and pulls on your content. Our brand value proposition in Canada is about confidence, and our brand value proposition in the US is about unexpectedly human. And so those are different kinds of stories and different kinds of positioning. And so you're always thinking through the lens of our US customer, but we're also thinking through the lens of what are we trying to communicate from an enterprise standpoint? And then what does excellent creative mean to those folks? So I'm constantly watching to see what others do. I was watching the last segment, and whatever you can borrow, steal, apply to the creative you're charged with bringing to market every day, then that's sort of what we're keeping our eye on.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know I loved listening in on the previous sessions. There's so many things I was taking notes on. I think, today people are surrounded by more digital content, more so now than ever before, especially in the last few years with COVID. So I'm curious to hear what changes or challenges have you noticed with engagement in digital content?
There's two things that jump out to me when I think about that question, and we certainly contributed to this when we were back to Walmart. But there was the large, sort of pivot to video, and we heard that a little bit in the last segment. And I don't know that stuck. I think people are reading content when it's good content. But we certainly changed our content mix because everybody was talking about the pivot to video. People weren't reading anymore. Too long didn't read. You got to get these videos in front of people. And then the other one is this fact or myth that I think has been busted pretty significantly, which is that, human has a attention span shorter than a goldfish. I don't believe that for a second, because long form content would have then died. So to me, we'll all watch, an 8 or 9 minute brand documentary if it's good. If it's crappy, then we're all going to tune out. So I think what digital content consumption has done is just given us way too many options to tune out. I am old enough to remember when you had to get up and turn the TV dial and you had like 3 channels to choose from. So if the content didn't speak to you, then you probably maybe just sat through it because there weren't any other options. But now, whether it's Sirius Radio, whether it's your podcasts, for me, I've started to get into audiobooks, and you realize like the narrator doesn't really connect with you the way you thought the book was going to go, and you're done. You're out and you're off to another book. And the same thing with Twitter and with all of our social feeds and with all of the content that comes at us all the time. It's why I sort of come back to, how do you differentiate yourself in a world that's becoming a lot of sameness? And so how do you do that within the guardrails of your brand without offending sensibilities, without getting on the wrong side of legal, and still do what you need to do every day, which is create really compelling content that people engage with.
Definitely. Wow. When we think about it, there really are so many small touch points where we are interacting with brands on a daily basis, whether that is through like video or longer form content. Can you speak a little bit about the importance of refining and perfecting all those moments of connection that a brand has with its customers?
Yeah, and we heard a lot about that in the previous session about testing and learning and A/B testing, and we're doing an awful lot of that as of late at TD, and especially as we've partnered with our marketing department to figure out, where is the customer in their journey? Are they, looking for a particular financial product? Are they looking for sound guidance? How do you connect with them as they go through life? And if depending on where you are in your life, you sort of start single, maybe you get married, or you find a partner, you may then have children, you then have to put the children through school, you're buying cars, you're buying homes. So there's all these moments, as we think about it in financial services, where we can touch a customer as they're looking for different offerings, different products, and what is it that's going to win them over? Is it the quality of the product? Is it the authenticity of the brand? And when you start comparing banks, there's not a lot of difference. A checking account is a checking account. There's not a lot of sexiness in banking. So for us, it's about the human stories about TD, that we can connect with customers with whom we share values and with whom we share beliefs and our shared commitments at TD. When we find customer segments that align to those, how do we reach them, and how do we connect with them where they might be experiencing our brand? And so TD's brand in the United States is America's most convenient bank. COVID has obviously put a big dent in how convenient you can be when you're closed. And so being the market leader in being open the longest hours, being open when folks need you and you can bring your dog in, and we've all of those sort of trappings that cemented our reputation as America's most convenient bank have eroded. And so you've got your brick and mortar, you've got digital, you've got all of these different touch points that between our marketing colleagues and then us as brand storytellers, where we're trying to reach these different and divergent audiences and make sure that they have the information that they need from TD to help them in those choices they're making.
Yeah, I think a really great way that you guys are expanding your brand storytelling is with TD's new content site, TD Stories, and the brand podcast, Straight Talk. So I was curious, what was it like expanding TD to these new mediums while also staying on brand and growing that story?
Yeah, we were really in need of a refresh when I joined. I think like a lot of brands, we had a fairly static digital news center. And again, in the last segment, we heard about why and was moving away from Twitter. Because she's not worried about breaking news. She's not worried about the audience that tends to use Twitter heavily. We are. We're in a corporate communications function, so we're really focused on earned media. We're really focused on owned media, and then we partner with marketing around a lot of the paid. So coming into the job, you know that you're trying to engage with your target audiences, not just have static one-way communication. So where's that hub where they can engage with us, where they can start to learn more about the brand, where they can see what we're doing to benefit, the colleagues at TD, the customers who bank with us, and the communities in which we operate. And so we knew we needed to build something that was more consistent with sort of the modern look and feel that people are looking for, that was obviously mobile friendly. And I know that sounds kind of silly in 2022 now, but 3 years ago, our site was still way back in the dark ages, and so we really needed to bring it forward. It is really consistent and on brand. We stayed within a lot of the brand guidelines for design. We did push some of the boundaries, but we partnered well with all of the necessary control centers inside of TD to make sure that what we were doing was going to be consistent with the brand. And so there's not a gigantic leap as you're on the td.com website and as you go over to TD Stories. So that was part of it, which was really just evolving from a static one-way repository of press releases into more of what we hope is a two-way conversation built around unique and differentiated stories. And oh, by the way, there's still press releases because we still need to talk to media and investor relations and analysts, and so they want that stuff. And then we want to sprinkle in some of the more human storytelling. And then I've touched on this a little bit, but we also are trying to improve our credibility and our reputation around providing guidance, no matter where you are in the sort of financial journey. And so we've really leaned into that heavily over the last 4 or 5 months. And again, that was one of those things that it doesn't sound terribly revolutionary, but in financial services, there's a difference between advice and guidance. There are only so many people that can provide true advice because it might be tied to expectations. And so this is broader sort of guidance, for instance, this week. And so we publish every Monday. We love alliteration at TD, so it's Money Matters Mondays. And we did like 5 tips on how to save on Valentine's Day. Just little things like that, where we're trying to build more credibility and be recognized more as a leader in that space when it comes with guidance. And we've seen some encouraging results from some tests that we've done as of late with Flipboard that we can get into. The other thing, Monica, that we wanted to do was we wanted to bring our respective content teams from Canada and the US together. So for all of the people that I have on my team in the US, we have counterparts in Canada. And we've, in the past, taken very different approaches to the kinds of content we were creating and how we publish. And we wanted to bring the sites into one place. So there's just one TD Stories. And then we use a geolocator to either peel you off into the Canadian content or into the US content. And then further down the road, we want to do a whole lot more customization so that you can sort of tell us what topics you might be interested in and serve up a much more customized and personalized experience to visitors. So in this first iteration, it's really been about how do we bring the US and the Canadian brands together? How do we leverage our resources across the borders? Stories don't stop at the border. What might work down here could also play for a Canadian audience. And there are differences in the market. So there are stories that are uniquely Canadian and uniquely American that might stay here better and have better results with our audience. So that was really the genesis of TD Stories and a little bit of where we want to go in the future. The podcast was really born out of COVID. And I think the saying is something like necessity is the mother of all inventions. Well, we cranked out an astonishing number of emails during COVID. I don't want to tell people what the number is. I'm sure other people on this call, their organizations probably all amped up email too, because we were all desperate to figure out how do you communicate with your employees when they're not in the office. A lot of the mechanisms that we use, digital signage, a lot of things around the office, in-person events, that they were all gone. So there was an over-reliance on email. And again, a little bit of reluctance inside of TD to do a public-facing podcast. Again, heavily regulated industry. What could we do that was on brand? What could we do that was differentiated? How do you get noticed in the podcasting space, which can be a bit of a challenge if you're operating on a shoestring budget, which we were. So it really started as an internal podcast. And along the way, similar to what happened when we did the podcast at Walmart, all of a sudden you start to get some critical mass inside. You start to leverage events that you're having, relationships that some of your executives may have with, um, you know, recognized, I don't want to call them celebrities, but recognized people in different industries. And so TD is very much focused on the D&I space, especially around disability and disability inclusion. And so a lot of our episodes featured people who were well known in that space, who were partnering with TD on events that we might be doing internally. And all of a sudden we saw that we had a show that, while it was going to resonate with our colleagues, might also appeal to broader external audiences. And so we were able to move pretty quickly and use some agile methodology to get approvals to start to push that out there, and then to start to push it across our platform. So it's still in its infancy. I'd say there's a lot of maturation that needs to happen, and a lot more development that we can put into that show and figure out where we want to go with it. So we're still flying by the seat of our pants a little bit. And again, we're still not in a work in the office kind of environment yet. So figuring out where it's going to go and what we want to do with it is going to be part of what we're focusing pretty heavy on this year.
It's so exciting. We actually doubled down on our podcast as well during COVID times, because it is one of the best ways to, try to keep growing that brand and looping more people in. And we can offline after this about it.
Yeah, I think I've told our team that I think there's really sort of three strategies. And, I think our tendency as creatives and as content folks, as writers, videographers, is probably to try to do something new all the time. We don't often celebrate our content enough, and we don't recycle it, and we talk about evergreen, but we don't really do it. And how do you pull it forward and not reinvent the wheel every time? And so I think podcasting is one of those where everybody wants their own shows, but then you get into it and it can present some challenges. And so I've told the team that I think there's really three approaches and I would share with people, which is one, can you just buy advertising on a show that matches your demographic? So for us, we've got a couple of key audience segments. If we were to reach out to some of the platforms and some of the shows, and they were to share audience information, are there natural alignments there on their listeners being in our target audiences? The second approach really is on, again, well-founded, well-known podcasts that speak to our industry. Can we place our executives on those shows, or some of our thought leaders or subject matter experts at TD to be guests? And then the third one is obviously, developing your own shows. So we're sort of trying to dabble in the second two, because I don't control all of the money around advertising, but how do we make our executives and subject matter experts available to shows where there's natural alignment, and then what do we do to carve out our own space in podcasting as a bank?
Yeah, it's finding that balance is everything, and it's so crucial. I wanted to talk a little bit more about other TD initiatives going on. So I saw that TD created a new pen made out of recycled water bottles, which must have been such a fun creative brief to work on. Could you tell us a little bit about the original brief and how you worked through it?
Creative briefs, got to have them. If you don't use them, I strongly suggest that you bring them into your organization, and they're your Bible. And I know we touched on this a little bit in the last segment about RACEs and about having documentation and how much it can benefit you when you're in the middle of it. And I would agree with that when you have a brief, you can always go back to the brief to figure out, what's our true north on this thing. I was never a big fan of it. I didn't run creative teams. My background is in writing. So you just sort of sit down and you do the story. Somebody tells you what they think the story is, or they give you a subject that you can interview, or you go cover an event, you make it your own. But when you start to try to create content at scale, and you have a small team, and then your team gets bigger, you need to have process in place. You need to have creative briefs. And so the creative brief really started with a marketing initiative designed to get customers and colleagues excited about the new pen. Pens are a very big deal at TD. If you think back to banks and how they were chained to the wall, we've always given our pens out. It's sort of a thing that ties into being unexpectedly human. And so this pen, as you mentioned, is made from recycled materials. And so the brief came in and it said, what can we do to build excitement and build a social campaign around the new TD pen? And that's about the totality of the brief. And I think in the brief, they mentioned that it was a recycled pen. And so we looked at it and we said, well, we're not really good at providing true marketing collateral. I think we've created assets that our marketing team finds valuable, and they slip into their flights all of the time. And I think that's a good reflection on our ability to sort of straddle the line. But we really wanted to tell sort of the brand story, like what was the cool story about a pen being created, and we got thinking about what happens when a water bottle is recycled. We all sort of had an idea as to what that manufacturing line could look like. So we started to dig a little bit, and then we found out, well, it's made in the USA. It's made by a TD customer in New Jersey, which is where some of my team is located right now. So it was like, okay, well, if we follow COVID protocols, could we do a video on the assembly line showing how the water bottle goes to pellets? The pellets are then turned into pens, and then the pens get into the stores. So there's a little bit of an ESG angle there in terms of like the environmental impact and minimizing it because of the recycled pens. And oh, by the way, then we were able to do, sort of like this 30-second sizzle reel that we were able to get on social and do a social cut down. And it was probably the most successful campaign we've had, with colleagues being allowed to share on social and use hashtags and all of those sorts of things to build critical mass. So, it was, again, I think it's the ability as a team to take some creative license with the brief. We've built trust across our relationship managers inside of communications and public affairs, as well as marketing, who said, yeah, you guys go crazy on the idea. And then, having a team that's small and nimble, we were able to dispatch pretty quickly to the manufacturer and sit down and interview with them. And we were able to do a medium form written story that, did well. And then also the video and the social cut down have done extremely well and have resonated very well with colleagues. And we've not done a broad release yet because the pens weren't in stores. I think the pens hit stores this Friday, and we call our branches stores. So they hit stores this Friday. So we're going to be resurfacing it. And just to sort of tell you how crazy we go for our pens, one of our executives was in Antarctica and took the pen with her and took pictures of the pen. We didn't know she was going to do that, and she sent them through to us yesterday, and they're good. So we can get those out on social and talk about, from like Antarctica to Nepal, these pens have been all over the world. They're now available in your store, and they're recycled, and all of those good things for the environment. So I think there's a little bit of the doing good while still being true to who we are with these pens and making them available to customers. So I know pens don't sound like the greatest invention in the world, but our customers love them, our colleagues love them, and this is a really cool story that we're able to spotlight a local small business. We're able to spotlight the environmental impact of using recycled materials, and we were able to have some fun with it.
I love that. The TD pen actually holds a very special place in my heart. It became my good luck charm way back when I was in school. I had to bring it to every exam after I started doing so well with them. So I will definitely be stopping by.
It was always funny to me when I would be traveling in New York or somewhere in our footprint, and you'd go to I would go out to dinner, and they would have the pen to sign the credit card bill with. So they're a big deal. You come into a new brand. When I went to Walmart, and you find out that things are a big deal, that you're like, that's a big deal, and you're like, yeah, that's a big deal. So there's the same thing for me with pens. I was like, pens are a big deal, and I was like, yeah, they're a very big deal. So we love our pens.
I love that. I know we were touching on this a bit before when we were talking about the story's content site and how that maintains that same look and feel as like the regular website. It's carrying that brand story across every touch point. And maintaining that is so crucial to growing brand equity. So I was curious, what does creative consistency mean to you? And what's your advice on the best ways to achieve it?
Yeah, I've been fortunate through my career to be in different spots at different times where there was either a mandate to break from brand standards because we were trying to do something new and a little bit sort of different in a market, and then being at TD where we're more risk averse. It's how do you stay in line with folks, and so we're not at a place yet where we're terribly sophisticated or have automated tools. So we're still using brand guidelines, that are in a centralized repository. So we can all understand our color palette. We can all understand where we use the shield and what the rules are with regards to our shield. And then again, as we talked about with TD stories, it's how do you color inside and outside of the lines, I guess, at the same time without alienating your other stakeholders. So you're not going to, suddenly change your brand's color palettes, and you're not going to do anything crazy with your logo or your trademark, at least for us in financial services. But I think there's probably going to be an opportunity as we continue to evolve as a team, communications and marketing, where there will be more automation, there will be more ways for people to pop in and create more content at scale. We were again hearing that in the session before us. We've got a team of 6 that we can, because we have 2 writers, a videographer, a graphic designer, and a publisher. We can create content pretty quickly, our small little team, and then we have control over our website. So to go from ideation in the morning to publishing by noon or in the afternoon, it's not a terribly big challenge for us, but we don't do it at scale. So, we're not going to create an asset in the morning that can be deployed across 15 states along the Eastern Seaboard. But I think that's probably where we're going to need to go in the future, in partnership with marketing, to be able to reach folks, and customize content and tailor content so that what folks are seeing in New York is maybe different than what they're seeing in Miami or in Portland, Maine. So it's true to their market. And I know that our marketing team is doing that now with digital signage in markets and a lot of out of home type stuff where it's customized to where they are. And I think what we saw, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier on Flipboard, when we were able to customize content, and we call it hyper local. So you've got these sort of national stories, and then how do you distill them down into our relevant DMAs? When we can take that content and distill it down into the market where we're going, huge, gains in engagement with our target audiences when the content is tailored to them. So I see a real opportunity moving forward to take those brand guidelines and those brand standards and put them into a way that we can then quickly create content and then push it out to our various markets.
Yeah, I mean, especially, you guys are such a great example, having both the Canadian side and then the US side, and really working through localization and also all of the fun opportunities and challenges that arise with that. I guess that leads me to this next question. What do you think that marketers or people in comms teams are missing when it comes to achieving creative excellence today?
Oh, that could get me in trouble. I touched on this in the opening statement. There's a lot of sameness out there, and I don't know that that's necessarily the fault of marketers or communicators. Some of it, I think brands, as we've seen over the last year to 2 years, are sometimes being pushed into spaces where they might not be comfortable. And we talk about a lot of stuff that comes from the Edelman Trust Barometer or other indicators that say customers want to hear brands more on societal issues. And depending on the day, those poll numbers seem to wildly fluctuate to me as to whether or not people want to hear from TD on XYZ issue, or such and such CEO weighing in on the latest. Like, is that what they want or not? So I think some of it is that we're trying to figure out, like, where do you get involved? And to me, the conversations we've always had is like, when it's consistent to your brand and when it's consistent in your footprint, there's probably more of a need for a brand to step in and get involved. So I'm sort of circuitously answering your question, which is, sometimes I think we're creating content, or we're being asked to create content, when we don't necessarily have a great feel or intuition on what we're supposed to say or how we're supposed to say it in a differentiated way. So whether you're weighing in on the 20th anniversary of 9/11 or you're weighing in on Black Lives Matter, if you don't have a unique point of view and a differentiated point of view and are saying something that's sincere and consistent with your brand, then I'm not sure why you're jumping in on social channels or creating content. And that's a challenge, because you've got internal colleagues who want you to say something. You may have some customers that want you to say something, and it can put you in a challenging brand or a challenging place. I think about ESG and how well defined or how poorly defined it is, and whether we as marketers or communicators really have a good idea as to what our customers want to hear from us on ESG, and we've distilled it down into doing good. People want to know that you as a company are doing good, that you're returning some value, and so I think brands can struggle with that. I also think brands have maybe struggled with how to speak to DE&I in a way that is authentic to their brand, and again is differentiated. And I know I've hit on that word a lot. And then I think at times we all tend to get caught up with shiny objects. And so I'll go back to the one that I think probably has stuck with all of us for better or worse, but Oreos and Dunkin' in the dark, and then you all are trying to recreate sort of this ephemeral moment with war rooms, and we're gonna live tweet during the Grammys or the Oscars or whatever it is, and we're gonna catch lightning in a bottle again, and you start to chase trends. So what I've always tried to do, and we don't do it as much at TD because we're a little bit more resource constrained, is we had a fantastic agency partner at Walmart who was actually embedded with us. We really developed a sort of agency and client cooperative inside of Walmart, and what that allowed us to do was for the agency to sort of keep an eye on trends and peek around corners, because I don't know a lot about the day-to-day of a marketer because that's not what I do, but in communications, we do everything from crisis communications to proactive press releases to brand storytelling. And there's a lot of days where your head's down and you're just putting out fires and you don't have a lot of time to look up and see, oh, I should be on this channel, or I should be doing this thing with content. And so having the right agency partner, I think, to help you understand maybe where the trends are or where there's some white space for you. So yeah, I don't like to be terribly critical of other brands because I don't want people to be critical of me and my team or work I've done in the past. But I think that we can all sort of fall into the trap of seeing what's working for another brand and maybe trying to do that at our own, and you're just creating the same stuff, and now all of a sudden you're a content polluter and you're not adding anything new to the world that's out there when we're all competing for the same eyeballs. And then I think, to the point that you and I, the conversation we had about a brief, starting to create content or rushing out to make a public statement on something when you don't really understand what you should be saying or how you should be saying it or the nuances can create some challenges as well.
For sure. I think a lot of it comes down to quality over quantity, and the all of the background that we have to put into our work. Like you were saying, rushing things it usually does not result in the best outcomes for anyone involved.
And it can be a challenge because a lot of times there's pressure to see immediate results, and so if something doesn't work, then you get into that quantity game and you just start creating more to see what will work. And we're lucky enough to have enough time to A/B test and to really learn what's happening with our content and on which channels and which and how it's performing with which audience segments. And so that's giving us an opportunity to be very thoughtful and purposeful about what we're creating and why and where we're distributing it.
Exactly. That kind of segues into my next question, which is, what creative trends are you noticing right now? And do you have any predictions for the rest of the year?
No, I never make predictions because they're always wrong. They're always wrong. There's things that I do as an individual that I don't do as a practitioner. My Twitter handle, my personal Twitter handle, is the most boring thing in the world. Don't follow me. I mean, I represent TD Bank. I used to represent Walmart. I'm always mindful of that, and so I tend to shy away from sort of bold proclamations or hot takes that are designed just to get a reaction. But that might be something that somebody would say is a trend. I personally don't use TikTok. My team adores TikTok. We as a bank are sort of dipping our toe in very carefully. So some of these things that might be the next big thing, we sort of collaborate as a team to try to understand where those things are going and then right size them for TD, because we're not going to be an early adopter. That I'm pretty sure of. That's a prediction I can probably stand by, which is you're not going to see TD sort of boldly go into spaces where nobody else has gone. We are a sort of fast follower. We're going to see what might be working, what's a safe space for us. And so I in this role, I don't spend nearly as much time as I did at Walmart trying to figure out what the next cool thing is. And I think that's what ultimately got us into podcasting at Walmart. We weren't certainly the first, but we weren't as late to the game. And it gave us an opportunity to find a space for us where our whole show was about sort of convening strange bedfellows and trying to sort of build a little bit of a cool factor around a brand that probably got associated with being a little bit outdated. As far as creative trends, it's funny because there's creative that stands out because it was maybe obscenely bad, and then there's creative that stands out and is memorable because it was insanely good, and then there's creative that sort of sits in the middle and was provocative and has led to a lot of conversations with my team. I would encourage anybody who's in a creative role, if you've got the capacity to bring your team together to have a creative review of other people's content. At Walmart, we called it the Friday Free for All. Again, I admit to being a big fan of alliteration. So, we were able to get together every Friday and look at whether it was commercials, whether it was brand storytelling, whether it was brand newsletters. I got my Amazon newsletter today. It's really great. I like what they're doing in a couple of things. We had a really robust conversation the other day about the M&M's rebrand. I actually don't have an opinion one way or the other. I'm curious to see where this is going. My team had some opinions on it. Also, there was maybe 2 weeks ago during the playoffs, there were a couple of commercials for the Apple Watch that were pretty provocative, where people were basically using their Apple Watch to call 911 minutes before what appeared to be really dire circumstances. And I think it touched a nerve with some folks, and other folks thought it was brilliant, creative. And so there's a lot of brands that I look to as sort of leaders in this space, and I still do, because they just continue to crank out really good creative. And then there's other brands that are sort of a little bit more edgy. And I'm always looking for aspects of creative that we can steal and apply to what we're doing at TD, because I think that's what all great marketers are doing. I mean, just to sit and try to come up with something new every day would be very challenging. So what can you do that sort of repurposes something else that's working out there and apply it to your industry?
I love that. And I'm sure that there will be a lot to talk about after the Super Bowl for all the ads.
I'm sure there will. There's parts of me that thinks maybe M&M's is leading up to something at the Super Bowl. There was some chatter, I guess, over the weekend that the Tom Brady retirement might be part of a Super Bowl ad. So now, even when there's no fire, everybody sees smoke in the days leading up to the Super Bowl ads, because of the way those have sort of fundamentally changed. And we were talking about that as a team as well, that, the Super Bowl ad used to be that 1 30-second or 60-second spot, and then it was done. And now brands get the 2 weeks leading up to it to leak the trailers and build a whole lot of buzz around the ad. Then you get the ad, and then now everybody is doing the follow-up conversations afterwards to talk about the ad. So it's a good time to be in creative, because we'll see it all here between the Olympics and the Super Bowl.
It is. It's really exciting. So I saw that we had one question come in saying, "Hi, Chad. First of all, thank you for taking the time to chat with us. So much good advice here. Secondly, go dogs." Now the question: the financial services industry has an influx of younger tech-based companies like Ally and even Robinhood to a lesser extent. How are you all adjusting to the new threat of those brands that operate in different channels like TikTok, but are going after the same eyeballs?
Good question. And I would probably need to rely on some of my colleagues in marketing to talk a little bit more about that than I do. But I think that when it comes to any of the brands out there, whether they're the national banking centers, or whether they're some of these banks like Ally and whatnot, for us, it's still going to come down to trying to create that authentic connection to our brand time. So I'll just sort of share this as a way to make the point. There's two real big audience segments that we focus on quite a lot at TD, and one is cautious boomers, and the other is driven optimists. And you may have already just figured out by the description of those are two wildly divergent audiences. Cautious boomers, obviously older, who probably grew up going to the bank, and they want to give Monica their paycheck to make sure that it's endorsed and it goes into their bank account. And then there's other people on the other end of the spectrum, like my kids, who have never stepped foot in a bank, and everything is done electronically. And so how does that unexpectedly human brand connect to both the person who is used to walking into our stores and connects with people who have no interest in maybe interfacing in a brick and mortar. And so that's the challenge for us with any of those groups, which is we still want to connect with you on being purpose driven and connect with you on the values that we share. And so that's been my approach there, whether or not you want to bank in a brick and mortar, or whether or not you want to bank online. I think it still comes down to whether you trust us and whether you like us. And I think we do that by telling the stories of our colleagues and our customers and our communities.